Dr. Cloud has explained the part that religion has played in this movement. Let's talk about the Freedom Riders themselves. I mean, who were these people, and where were they going, and what was their purpose?
Well, the original Freedom Riders were 13 out of Washington, D.C. They had come from different parts of the United States. In fact, John Lewis, who's now a congressman in Atlanta, Georgia, was a student at the American Baptist College here in Nashville and was one of the participants on the original ride out of Washington, D.C. The purpose of the Freedom Ride was to test the reaction to the Interstate Commerce Commission ruling. The Interstate Commerce Commission ruling provided for individuals who were traveling from one state to another, interstate passengers, to not be subject to any kind of discrimination. However, those who were traveling within a particular state would be subject to the laws of that state.
Dr. LaFayette, for some of our readers who might not be able to get around all of this legalese in reference to it, what we're saying is that once transportation reached a certain area in the South, that those black persons who happened to be sitting in the front of the bus were told to what? Move to the back of the bus. Is that essentially what you're saying? And that the ICC, the Interstate Commerce Commission, came out in opposition to that. And it was within that context the Freedom Riders were concerned with what? Testing this kind of ruling. Now, leaving Washington, D.C., what were some of the things that they encountered, and what were some of the, well, I guess the itinerary of the group?
Well, they traveled from Washington, D.C. down through Virginia and on into South Carolina, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and they had the first encounter with violence in North Carolina. Then no one was actually arrested or whatever at that point. The most severe area where they experienced the avalanche of violence was in Alabama. The Freedom Riders experienced their buses being burned. The bus was burned in Birmingham, and then in Anniston people were pulled from the bus and beaten, and one person was injured to the extent that they had to have 50 stitches to close the wounds. Well, at that point, in fact, people should realize that they didn't just simply burn the bus. They threw an incinerator bomb in the bus and then held the door.
Very good. Now, this they that you're talking about now, the violence that you've mentioned, and of course all of that has been painted, and I think that the two of you being participants in this movement are very familiar with who they are, you see, but I think that many of our viewers might not exactly know who these folks are that are perpetrating this kind of violence, and who they represented and the kind of violence that they were perpetrating. Now, why don't you give us some information relative to who the Freedom Riders met on this journey, and how representative were these people of the general population? You see, all of these things are in recent memory to most of us, but many of us, in view of the changes that I think that we've all witnessed in American society since the Freedom Rides, I think it's difficult to understand who they were, you see, and I think it's within that context.
Well, they were local whites from that area that we assumed. We didn't really know them, directly, but these were people who are very much in opposition to the Freedom Rides. We learned later that people had traveled from other distances to participate in that. We felt that it was important to continue the Freedom Rides in spite of that kind of violence that we experienced, because it would have been a sad note for the Freedom Rides to end on sort of a note of violence. And we felt that in Nashville, for example, the students decided they would continue the Freedom Rides. And we knew it was risky, and we knew that our lives would be placed in jeopardy. So there were 20 of us who were students here at the time, from TSU, from Fisk University, and some from Scarrett and other colleges around the area. There were 20 of us, and we decided we'd send the first 10 to see if they would survive. And in the process of making this trip, we made the decision that we would divide up our belongings to our roommates and classmates that we left behind. sort of a living will, so to speak, in case if we didn't make it back.
The actual fear of death was, and it's difficult to believe that, I mean, to understand that at this particular point, but the actual fear of death, of not being able to successfully complete a ride on a bus in interstate commerce, that's traveling through interstate commerce, the fear of death is so great that 10 were sent and 10 divided their goods among those who were left. Is that what we're saying?
Yes, because we did not know whether we would survive. There was a good chance that we would not survive. We then set the first 10. They arrived in Birmingham, Alabama, and among them was John Lewis and Catherine Burke, who's now Catherine Brooks, and some other students from Fisk University and TSU. What happened was that they were arrested, placed in jail under protective custody, and then at midnight they were carried by cars to the state line, Tennessee and Alabama, and dumped out. Once we recognized the fact that they had been dumped out and they reached us by phone, Leo Lillard actually got in rented cars and went down and picked them up and took them back to Birmingham. In the meantime, I was with the second group. We had gone down to Birmingham to meet with those. And we stayed up all night in the bus station trying to get a bus. And we managed to get arrangements for one bus to take us. And we discovered that this bus was going to take us all the way to New Orleans. Now, this is my first encounter with the Ku Klux Klan. They stayed up all night with us in the bus station, and they stepped on our feet and threw cold ice water on our faces and that sort of thing, and tried to harass us and said a lot of ugly things about us. But we were determined to continue. When we were able to get the bus, we discovered that they were going to take us all the way to New Orleans. So we went back and purchased one-way tickets from Birmingham to Montgomery. Well, we coasted into the city of Montgomery with police escort. Once we arrived, then there was no police escort at all. We managed to go to the bus station, and it was the most awful thing I'd ever seen in my life. A mob streamed out of the doors of the bus station, attacked all of the reporters, those who had TV cameras and those who had still cameras, and they beat them to a pulp and chased them off with axe handles and hoes and rakes. And many of them were dressed in overalls, the mob. And there were women in the mob, which really surprised me. They were yelling and screaming and swinging with their purse. And then they finally attacked us. Well, we saw them attacking the reporters, who were all white. We knew we were going to be next. And they were simply blinding the eyes of the camera so they could do what they had to do in the dark.
And so there was that much intensity in reference to the hatred and the animosity toward those who would ride buses and ride from one place to another. Dr. Cloud, I think that one of the things that you're trying to recapture in this Freedom Riders Revisited movement that you've got underway is to give us some idea, to give the young people some idea of some of the problems and some of the struggles that Dr. LaFayette has already talked about. Why don't you give us some information about what you're planning on doing in terms of the Freedom Riders Revisited?
Actually, as Bernard has described, the kind of scary, genuinely scary experiences that the Freedom Riders went through, I would like to underline the fact that what stands out in my mind, and what I hope will stand out in the minds of the young people today, is the courage and dedication. They were not doing it because they wanted to be beat up. They were trying to expand the boundaries of freedom. And to tick off what we propose to do, on Monday, tomorrow, we will leave early and go to Birmingham, and the theme there will be the role of the churches then and now. Dr. King wrote his famous letter from a Birmingham jail explaining why gradualism was not good enough. And then on Tuesday, we will go to Montgomery, and we've lined up a panel on the role of the media in covering civil rights then and now. I'm stressing then and now because you see this is not just deja vu. We're not interested just in looking